Welcome to the Therapy and Prayer podcast. Here you'll find the intersection between faith and mental health. I'm your host, Camille. I'm a licensed therapist and clinical social worker, but more importantly, I'm a Christian who really loves the Lord. And I'm just trying to navigate this life without falling victim to it, just like everyone else. Here we take a faith-based approach to all things mental health and wellness, because the Bible tells us to guard our heart and mind, and sometimes we need a little bit of help with that. Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Therapy and Prayer. I'm so happy that y'all are here. I really hope that you all have been enjoying the show so far. I can't express how much of a blessing it's been to me just in preparing for each episode and really taking the time to meditate on the word, but also on what God is doing in my life. It's also helping me to reflect on my mental health and the connection between my mental and spiritual health. And I pray that it's doing the same thing for all of you. But listen, I say all that to say that we're not going nowhere no time soon. So if it ain't for you, that's okay. If it ain't for you, that's okay. If it's not for nobody else, it's for me. Today, I have a topic I want to talk about today, and I wasn't sure whether or not I should talk about it yet because it's something that I'm still working through and that God is still bringing me through and teaching me. But it is something that I know a lot of people deal with or have dealt with, and it can be a struggle for us sometimes, especially given the society that we live in and the culture that we live in. And even though it's an area where I'm still actively growing, it's just been really revealing to me, and it's been so beneficial and so helpful. God has just really helped me to reframe a few things. And reframing your perspective is one of the biggest mental health tips that I could ever give to anyone about anything, honestly and truly. One of my clients said to me one time, because we had a session and a lot of it, I don't know, I just was reframing a lot of things and giving her some different ways to interact with things. And she was like, so is the secret to life just like finding a different way to look at it? And I was like, I mean, kind of, kind of, that's one of them. But anyway, so what we're talking about today is contentment. And whenever I mention the word, whenever I say contentment or mention something about being content or trying to find contentment, 8.5 times out of 10, somebody else will respond with, well, yeah, but I don't want to get complacent. And there's this thing where we have somehow made the two synonymous, contentment and complacency. Now, while there are some similarities, I guess, between the two of them, they're very different things. The Bible warns us about one and encourages the other. So they're not at all the same. But I think because of the society and culture that we live in a world that tells us to never be satisfied. We live in a world that tells us to always be seeking and working towards the next best thing. And to never be satisfied, never stop trying to get more and more and bigger and better, bigger and better. And so the goalpost is always moving. So this whole idea about being content, it feels foreign and it feels like we're being lazy and just not wanting to work hard. And so I understand that conflict, and I found myself there as well. But I think because that conflict is so common, that's why I really wanted to talk about it, because we need to find a way to find contentment with where we are. And it doesn't mean that we're not working towards other things. I'm getting ahead of myself. Listen, we're going to get into all of that today. We're going to talk about contentment and we're going to talk about complacency, because both of them have to do with our spiritual walk, with our faith, and both of them have to do with our mental health and can really affect our mental health in some harsh ways if we let it. And I'm just really big on awareness. Anytime I'm talking to someone about anything or trying to help someone work through something, a big part of that journey is just increasing our awareness about your current relationship with that thing. Where does that thing live within you now? What role does it play in your life, in your mind, in your fears? How does it exist for you in your world now? What role does it play? What purpose does it serve? We have to know where we're starting in order to know how to move forward at all to get where we want to be. So that's what we're going to do today. Let's start with some general definitions. If you haven't found out by now, I'm big on definitions. Words are very important, the words that we use, but especially as we are working through some sensitive topics, it's important that we have a working definition. So we have definitions of both complacency and contentment, okay? So the dictionary definition of complacency is self-satisfaction especially when accompanied by unawareness of actual dangers or deficiencies. Another definition is a feeling of calm satisfaction with your own abilities or situation that prevents you from trying harder. So some things that stood out to me with this definition is the self-satisfaction and being accompanied by unawareness of actual dangers or deficiencies. So it's kind of that ignorance is bliss, not really being aware or vigilant about anything else that's going on or potential threats, potential missteps, and really just kind of relying on your own resources and skills and using that to make it so that you don't have to work harder. Okay, we'll get into that more. So, dictionary definition of contentment is a state of mental and emotional satisfaction with things as they are. So, immediately there's some differences between those two. Complacency has to do with self-satisfaction, relying on your own abilities and having a lot to do with your circumstances. And contentment is mental and emotional internal satisfaction. Those are some of the biggest differences that I've learned and that we're going to talk about today is the internal versus external satisfaction. So let's start with talking about complacency because I think that is what steers us away from even seeking contentment because we fear that by trying to be content that we're actually going to be complacent instead. And so we just stay away from anything having to do with satisfaction or stillness at all. So let's deal with that first. Let's tackle complacency. So from a mental health perspective, complacency has a lot to do with two specific defense mechanisms. You've probably heard this term, especially if you have been in therapy at all. But if you haven't heard this term, a defense mechanism is an unconscious psychological process that is attempting to avoid any type of conflict or perceived fear. So some common defense mechanisms are catastrophizing. So everything seems like it's the worst thing ever, or making a mountain out of a molehill, right? Catastrophizing, rationalizing, explaining things away, or justifying and finding a way to hold on to some of our unhealthy habits. But the ones that I think are really present in complacency are avoidance and denial. All right now, avoidance and denial are key elements of complacency, as are, now that I'm thinking about it, I think there's also a lot of justification and rationalization in complacency as well. When I think about complacency, I get this vision in my mind of someone sitting on the couch in a space or a home that where they have maybe settled. I think about settling. There it is. When I think about complacency, I think about settling. And when I think about settling, I think about avoidance of maybe trying something new, or avoidance of seeking something better, or going into an unknown situation. I think about staying in your comfort zone. So when I think about complacency, I think about someone who is finding reasons and explanations and excuses and justifications for staying in their comfort zone, which means I'm just going to stay right where I am. I don't have to work any harder than I'm already working because what I've been doing has been working for me so far. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. And that whole settling and staying in your comfort zone is because we're afraid of what might exist outside of our comfort zone. Right. So while there might be some fabricated sense of satisfaction in complacency, right? Like it's been working for me so far. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Like all the bills are paid, right? That's the fabricated sense of satisfaction. But there's this internal void. There's not much internal peace or satisfaction. I think it's because that you're either not living up to your potential, or that there is more that you could or should or want to be doing, but you're afraid of doing it for whatever reason. You have convinced yourself that there's no need to exert any more effort than you are currently exerting in your life. That is complacency. Yeah. Okay. I like that. We're going to work with that one. Some people might be saying, well, what's wrong with that? The bills are paid. And it has been working for me. Like, let me just, stay here. Life is hard enough. Why would I want to invite more difficulty by stepping outside of my comfort zone or going into an unknown space? It's easier and maybe even safer in some ways just to stay with where you are, stick with the devil right? But the problem with complacency is that there is no internal peace or satisfaction. The issue with complacency is that it, along with all of these defense mechanisms that we listed, it is rooted in a place of fear. I have a general rule. We do not make decisions based on fear. If your decisions are coming from a place of fear, then you're not walking in faith. So as a Christian, that's why I have that rule. As a human, as a person, as a mental health professional, I have that rule because if you are making decisions from a place of fear, then you are allowing your anxiety to control every single element of your life. And that's not living. You're still in survival mode. If you're making decisions from a place of fear, then you are still in your survival mode and you have not been able to find any rest. You will not be able to find any rest. So on both sides here, we don't make decisions from a place of fear, even if that decision is to do nothing or to do nothing different. You deserve better than that. You are capable of better than that and of more than that. God wants more than that for you. Now, when I really sit and think about it, it's easy to say, don't get complacent. Don't just be stuck in your comfort zone. Don't be fearful of stepping outside of that and trying something new. But the thing is that complacency, I think it can really sneak up on you because no one wakes up one day and says, you know what, I'm going to settle and I'm not going to try any harder on anything else. It sneaks up on you because life is hard. That's the simplest way I can put it. Life is hard and there's always a reason to not do something, or there's always a reason to put something on pause or to say, you know what, I'm going to revisit this at a later date. Right. I just think about my own life. I am an ADHD girl, just like so many of us, which means that I'm queen of starting a project and putting it down. And there are some that I've picked back up and there are some that I've just never picked back up. But that concept on a larger scale, I think applies as well when we're in this conversation, right, about not moving forward. Because let's say maybe you were wanting to go back to school and you started the application process, but then something came up or life got in the way. And so that got put on hold and you never just went back to it. It's not that you never thought about it again, but it's that you continue to find reasons not to go back to it. And if we were to dissect those decisions about not going back to that application, I believe that we would find a fear at the root of that. A fear of whether or not you would be successful in going back to school again. A fear about whether or not you would be able to get in or what kind of student you would be. Or if people would laugh at you for going back to school later in life. Or if you would actually be able to get a better job with it. Or if you would pass or fail. So many fears and realistic ones, right? Because this is a scary world. There's a lot to be fearful of. So now you haven't finished the application and now it's been 2 years and now you're more comfortable at your job and you're like, well, what's the point? Right? I know people who talked about doing something for so long. I have a friend of mine. Okay. Quick little story. I used to have locks. I've had locks twice now, but my first set of locks, I started back in undergrad and I had them for 5 years. And the whole time I had them, my friend, she was like, oh, I love it. I love your locks. Like one day I'm going to get them. She would always say, one day I'm going to lock my hair. One day I'm going to lock my hair. I had mine for 5 years and she never did it. And then when I got rid of my locks, I combed them out. And then sometime around there, she actually started hers. And she would always say oh, if I had just started them back when you still had yours, they would be so long by now. If I had just started them back then, they would be so long by now. And I was always like, listen, you got here eventually, right? Because you could have never done it. You could have never gotten back to it. I think that happens with so many of us. There's always a reason not to do something. Always. Don't ask me right now what some of her reasons were for not getting them locks because this was years ago, okay? I said undergrad. That was a long time ago. I'm in my 30s, all right? But the point remains that that's not an uncommon story to put something off for years and years. And the older we get and the more responsibilities we have, the more legitimate reasons there are not to do something or not to change something or just to stick with the status quo. Stick with the stuff you know. Is that how it goes? I really wasn't a High School Musical kid. My sister was. How'd that song go? Somebody tell me. All right. But anyway, it's not uncommon to like take a break or a sabbatical from something. But if we're not careful, that temporary break can become permanent. And then we end up settling, but still having like when you end up settling that way, you always have that thought in the back of your head, like, what if, what if, what if? Like, what if I had actually finished that application? I wonder if I would have gotten into school. I wonder what kind of student I would have been. And those what ifs, they're like haunting you. It's it's like haunting you. And then we have these regrets of things that we never did. And then that builds into resentment, into bitterness. It just makes you a bitter person. And it makes you just doubt yourself even more. And so this is how it can really affect your mental health in negative ways. So we have to be honest with ourselves about why we are or are not making some changes in our life, why we are or are not doing the things that we want to be doing, or putting forth more effort, or trying the hard thing, or learning the new skill, or applying for the new job, or going back to school, or talking to that person, whatever it is. I'll use myself as an example, right? Because like I mentioned, like I've been a starter and stopper historically, but again, God is delivering me from that and I'm not claiming it anymore, but that was really a part of my story. I think where I have seen this the most in my life actually has to do with this podcast and creating content in general. I Several years ago, I think I realized that like one of my gifts is in speaking, and in finding ways to deliver some complicated subjects or topics in palatable ways, in ways that we can understand. And I know that it's been a blessing to people in my life. And I'm always talking. I always have something to talk about, something to say. And so this concept of speaking on a public platform is not a new one for me. Whether it's creating content on social media or whether it's doing this podcast, I have not only thought about it, but started and stopped so many times. And there was always what I would say a, quote unquote, legitimate reason. But at the root of all those reasons was a fear of rejection, a fear of judgment, essentially. It was, oh, well, I just started this private practice. And so that has to take my focus and my attention right now. So no, I don't have the time, or, I'm too busy with work. So I don't have the energy, or, I haven't been able to put a content calendar together. So no, or I don't know what kind of content I want to make. Do I want it to be educational or personable? Or do I want it to do this or to do that? Or I would start for a couple weeks or a few months and then I would miss a couple of days and then say, oh, well, I missed a couple of days. So there's no point in going back. So like just on and off for years. Now that would have been fine, but I knew that it was something that I wanted to do. And every time that I did put something out, put out some piece of content, there was always a positive response. It always seemed to resonate with people. Even if it didn't resonate with a ton of people, it always resonated with a couple. And I've never been, well, let me not say that. There have been times where I've used the numbers as another reason as to not continue or to put it down, right? Oh, it's only a couple hundred people. So like, won't nobody miss me if I'm not here? But every time I put something out, there's been a positive response. Someone has resonated with it. And that is why I'm wanting to show up in this space anyway, to help anybody, to help somebody. So that was turning into a sense of complacency. And I knew that it was because I never had any peace about it. There was always a part of me, like it just always kept coming back up for me. Like that drive or that desire to create wellness content never left me. And every time I would revisit it, I would be like, okay, this time we're going to, okay. And then I would get discouraged for whatever reason and just stop. And I realized that I was allowing that complacency to stop me from moving forward. And it was making me feel like dissatisfied in a few different ways. So now I'm looking for satisfaction in other areas, right? When we don't have internal peace or satisfaction. And that's not to say that I didn't have any internal peace, right? Because I'm a child of God and creating content also was not the only thing in my life. Like I have a full life, right? Outside of that. But in that area specifically, I didn't have peace. I didn't have satisfaction. And when we don't have that internal peace, we seek external peace or external validation. And so we go to our vices and we go to our distractions and we go to our unhealthy habits and unhealthy relationships and all of that, trying to fabricate a sense of that peace. But that internal peace and that internal satisfaction cannot be fabricated. And it does not come through our circumstances. That was the mistake. And it's not even just in the content. There have been several different areas in my life where I have tried to manipulate my circumstances in order to try to find a sense of peace, a sense of rest, whatever it is. I've definitely fallen victim to that. And that is actually how God showed me my discontent was through my complacency. Look at how he worked. Look at that. But my complacency was driven by anxiety and it was driven by fear. It was driven by this fear of rejection, driven by this fear of abandonment. And so those fears never went anywhere. Just because I didn't follow through with the thing, those fears never went anywhere. So now, not only am I not doing what I want to be doing, but I'm still walking around being scared. I'm still walking around with these fears, or I'm still walking around with this anxiety. So it's like, girl, what's the risk? What's the risk? The risk is that you'll be judged. You're going to be judged anyway. Hello? Where people are always judging people. That's it. That's it. What's the other risk? That you'll be rejected by people who don't know you? Even though what I saw was the opposite of that, because whenever I did put out content, I was not rejected. So where that fear of rejection came from, or what level of rejection I was afraid of, we'll probably never know. And it wasn't until I kind of committed to be more consistent with creating any kind of content that I realized that like those fears are not really real. they're just not really real. So the risk is that you might actually overcome the fear. Like that sounds worth it to me. In my case, it was worth it. For sure, it was worth it in my case. But also in my case, if I'm honestly, reflecting on my own complacency, I was being avoidant and I was trying to distract myself. And those are those defense mechanisms that I talked about before. I think it shows up differently in everyone. But if you are resonating at all with this concept of being complacent and being stuck in your comfort zone, then I would challenge you to take a deeper look and see if you can figure out, what is that fear? Like what's the fear at the root of your complacency? What is the defense mechanism that's at play here? Is it avoidance? Is it distraction? Is it rationalization? Is it justification? Is it catastrophizing? Right? Like if I do this thing, then everything else is going to crumble, or there's going to be some sort of ruin. Like we have to be realistic here. But defense mechanisms are all rooted in fear. Okay? Now, like we've said before, right? As a child of God, God has not given you a spirit of fear, but of power and of sound mind. So if you are able to see that your fears are impacting the decisions that you're making, or like the ways that you're moving about your life, like immediately right there, we have a decision to make. So when God shows me those kinds of things, I'm like, oh, hold on. This is driven by fear and you haven't given me a spirit of fear. So if you're not impacting this decision, then who is? Because somebody is. Okay. Now, if it ain't God, then who is it? And they got to go, okay? Immediately, expeditiously, they've got to go. So while I'm sitting in this complacency, I'm now dealing with shame and disappointment because I know that I should be doing this thing that I actually want to do. I know that I'm stopping myself and that I'm allowing fear to control me. So now there's shame, there's disappointment. Now I'm judging myself, which that was the fear anyway, right? Fear of judgment from other people. And this happens a lot. A lot of times the fear that, like the thing that we fear other people will give to us or project onto us, we're probably already suffering at our own hands because of it. So like I was already judging myself whole time thinking I'm afraid of other people judging me. Girl, you're judging yourself. I'm already being judged. I'm already being judged. And my own judgment is the loudest judgment because everybody else's judgment is silent and it's assumed because ain't nobody saying nothing really. We secretly and silently judge one another, but very loudly judge ourselves. So whole time I'm just finding more reasons to judge myself. Girl, that was kind of crazy, Camille. We've grown from that. We're still growing, but we have grown from that. Praise God. But all of these things, right? The shame, the disappointment, the judgment, these are all symptoms of my complacency. So I was not okay in that sense, right? Like my mental health, those were some areas where I was definitely struggling in my mental health. And so much of it was self-imposed. That's the wild part. Like that's the blessing and the curse. It's the blessing because once you realize that so many of these things are self-controlled, are self-imposed, then that means that you have the power to do something about it because you're the one who did it in the first place. You're the one who put the shame and disappointment and judgment, which means that you're the one who can release it. So that's really like a powerful thing when we acknowledge it. But it's sad because it's like, dang, why have I been putting myself through this unnecessarily? This goes back to our self-compassion, okay? When you realize that you have been inviting more suffering on yourself, apologize. Apologize and don't be mad at yourself, okay? Because that's only going to add more shame and disappointment. Just apologize and commit to doing better. Like, do better for yourself, you know? Okay, this is not our scripture of the day, but there is a verse that talks about complacency, and it is Proverbs 1:32. And it says, "For the simple are killed by their turning away, and the complacency of fools destroys them." I think that's going to look different in every person's life, right? Depending on your circumstance. But what I was just talking about, that whole cycle of complacency turning into shame and disappointment because it's rooted in fear and anxiety, that is a really intense type of destruction, and it can turn into a really intense type of destruction because now you create a narrative about yourself and about who you are. And that creates this tint of how you view yourself and the world around you. And now you're walking in that and you're living in that. And it's like, imagine like if that's what you're living in and that's what you're walking in, what kind of life are you keeping from yourself? What kind of life could you potentially be living instead of the one that is riddled with shame, disappointment, anxiety, fear, judgment, complacency, all of that? We may never know. We may never know. But the Bible says the simple are killed by their turning away from God, turning away from faith, turning away from growth, whatever it is, because it keeps you complacent. It keeps you stuck. So in a way, that's like a death sentence, We don't want that. I don't want that for you. God doesn't want that for you. One of the reasons that it was important for me to do this podcast is that in recent months, I have really started to see the connection between my mental health and spiritual warfare, really. And so when I have these moments where I'm realizing that fear is driving anything that I'm doing, I realize that that's not from God. And that means that I'm allowing myself to be controlled by something else. So if it's not God, then it's another spirit, and it's one that we reject and rebuke, right? So the spirit of fear that was keeping me complacent and stopping me from moving forward, stopping me from carrying out this idea, this desire that had been on my heart for so long, I realized that I was turning away from a call on my life. I was turning away from an opportunity to edify and uplift God and his people. I was turning away from an opportunity to use my gift that he blessed me with on purpose. And when I put it in those terms, it became so much easier for me to just do the thing that I was scared of when I realized where the fear was coming from. Is that making sense? Like, y'all know that verse that says, like, we fight not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, right? And demons and rulers of the, like, all of that. That's very, very real. And it happens in these ways, in these subtle ways. Like, no, I'm not going to do that thing. I'm not going to go back and finish that application, when really underneath all that, under the surface, that's rooted in fear, and fear is not from God. Like that's spiritual warfare. And we have to start interacting with things in that way. That makes it so much more courageous. At least for me, it made me so much more courageous when I realized this is spiritual warfare. And I know that I have the full armor of God. If we're talking about warfare, right? I'm equipped. I'm equipped for this. Like I'm built for this, like the Holy Spirit is with me. So I'm very much equipped and built for this. So that made it so much easier for me to come out of that complacency, right? And really start to walk in the like abundance and the blessings, right? And in my purpose, or start to explore even more about what my purpose is. I think that's something that I'm, still exploring, but I feel like I'm getting closer to it. And that's been exciting too. Maybe we'll have a different episode about that, but I feel like I'm getting kind of close. And that's been exciting. And I think it never would have happened had I allowed my fear to continue to keep me stagnant and to keep me complacent. So much of our fear, and our anxiety of doing something different or doing something new, it has to do with the unknown. The most basic definition of anxiety is the fear of the unknown. And I think that is what drives a lot of our complacency. I mean, I know for me, that was a part of it, right? It was the unknown. I don't know how this is going to go. I don't know how it's going to be received. I'm still not sure how it's being received, but I'm doing it anyway, right? I could continue to let that stop me, the fear of the unknown stop me from doing something that I believe is very important. So if you allow it, the fear of the unknown will stop you from walking in your purpose. And that ain't right. Like, come on now, because who else can walk in your purpose but you? So you're robbing all of us. Hello? So in that sense, maybe complacency is also a form of control, like staying in your comfort zone. At least I could control that because I already know what exists here in this comfort zone. It's predictable, and that makes it comfortable, and that makes it safe. But remember what we said about control. It's literally impossible to predict the future. So it's impossible to control the future. And spoiler alert, no one knows what they're doing. That's once I realized that nobody, the smartest person doesn't know what they're doing. The smartest person is still figuring it out day by day. That unlocked something in me when I realized that. And I think it just gave me permission to try. Like, have you heard people say, don't be afraid to be seen trying? That's so real. It's better to be seen trying than to be seen stagnant, I think, in my humble opinion. But, who am I? But acknowledging that no one knows what they're doing, I think, or I hope that it will make you courageous enough to try, that it will help you to step into the unknown, and that it will help you to trust God to lead you through the unknown, because he's already there. He's already where he's trying to take you, and he's just waiting for you to meet him there. So trust God to lead you through the unknown. Okay, so let's switch gears a little bit and talk about contentment. We have tackled complacency, and hopefully we have given you some clarity, right, on what that might be and some of the reasons for it so that you can release it. But I had a hard time recognizing my complacency. I didn't recognize my complacency because I was always working towards something. And, like we said earlier, we think about complacency, we think about someone who's like settling and just not wanting to work hard, not wanting to work towards anything. So because I was always working towards something, I didn't recognize my complacency because I was not complacent in my life in general, just in a couple different areas. I only gave y'all one example, but there was a couple areas, Anyway. So I didn't recognize that that's what it was, because I was always working towards something. I vividly remember all throughout my 20s saying on multiple occasions, I can't wait until I get to a place in my life where I'm not chasing something. I just want to get to the place where I can rest. And I always felt like that rest was going to come from some specific circumstances. When I made X amount of money, or when I had the husband, or when I had the house, or whatever it was, that I felt like that is when I would get my rest. And I would always say, like, I can't wait until I can get to that point where I won't have to be chasing something anymore. I said that all throughout my 20s and probably even at the beginning of my 30s. That's how I felt for the longest. I just always felt like I was chasing something, working towards something. I had this vision for my life, but that's the thing, is that like the vision for my life would keep changing. And the goalpost just keeps moving. And that's what happens in our society and in today's culture. When we live in this world of never being satisfied, the goalpost will continue to keep moving and you will never be satisfied. You'll never get there. Like you'll just keep coming up with these unattainable goals. That's it. And then your life just feels like you're always running, always chasing, always grinding, always work. That's how I was feeling. And it's just exhausting, but I have felt that way for most of my adult life. And so because of that, I never once thought that I was complacent because I was like, no, because I'm not settled, so I'm not complacent. But I very much was, right? Not only was I complacent, but what God has recently showed me was my discontent. And what God showed me is that I was relying on my external circumstances. It was always when I get this, when that happens, then I'll be good. Then I can rest. Then I have peace. I was relying on my external circumstances to give me peace, but the peace that passes all understanding comes from God and God alone. And so when he showed me that, and y'all, he really only showed me this a couple of weeks ago, right? Or a month or so ago, it really blew my mind. Let me tell you how it happened. Okay. Because and this is what I mean when like God is still working. He is still working on me with this. Like we're in the middle of it still now. Like this is y'all getting this in real time. Okay. Okay. So here's how God showed me myself. It was wild once I realized what it was too. I said, girl, what? All right. So I moved to Houston about 7 months ago now, and I was blessed to move into a 2-bedroom apartment, which was big for me because for the past 3.5 years, I was in a 1-bedroom apartment. And since COVID, I had been working from home, and so my office was also in my living/dining room, and it was a whole thing. And so I moved to Houston. I'm in this beautiful 2-bedroom apartment, and I'm so grateful. And not even 6 months later, I am convinced that I need to move into a house. And so I'm over here like, okay, well, I need to make, some more money so that I can afford to move into a house and so I can rent, and I need a yard for the dog, and I need this and I need that. I'm already thinking about what else I need and not being satisfied with what I have. When I realized how quickly I had gone from being grateful for what I had to feeling like what I had wasn't enough, that it literally stopped me in my tracks. I said, whoa, 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 whoa. Hold on. Why is it so urgent? Why is it so urgent that I move from this place into a bigger one? Is it a need or is it a want? That God has been showing me that a lot lately in a few different ways in my life. Is it a need or is it a want? And moving into a bigger place was one of the things that was a want that I had somehow convinced myself was a need, or I had turned it into a need. And that for me is what showed me my discontent. Because why would I need anything outside of what God's already doing for me? If I'm thinking about it, has he ever not provided for me? No, absolutely not. In fact, he has provided in abundance for me. In abundance. He has allowed me to sustain myself in unconventional ways for years at this point, even though some of it has been hard, but he's allowed me to sustain myself. He's given me new opportunities that I didn't imagine or see coming. He's allowed me to find community. He's allowed me to grow in him. I have seen so much spiritual growth since I moved to Houston. It's really crazy. Like that alone to me is confirmation that this was the right move for me. But all of that has happened. Yet and still, I'm sitting here thinking about the fact that I need to move into a bigger place. Huh? Girl, what? Huh? And so I realized that I was not being content with what I had and with where God had me. I'm a firm believer that God doesn't make any mistakes. I don't believe in coincidences. He has me exactly where I am at this exact time for a specific purpose, even if I don't know what it is. And for a while now, I've been finding peace and comfort in the fact that, even if I don't know what God is doing, I know that he's doing something. But even in that, right, I would have like fake contentment. Like, okay, God, I'm not going to get a new job right now. It's clear that you don't want me to have a new job right now because I haven't gotten one. But it was always like a yet. And it was like, all right, we'll revisit this later. Because I definitely still need a new job. It's just not happening yet. So I'll revisit later. But even that, I was like, girl, why do you need a new job? The job that you have now is paying the bills. The job that you have now has afforded you the luxury of moving across the country without missing a beat. Huh? What? So why would I need a new job? Oh, because I want a job with benefits. But the job that you have now allows you to pay out of pocket for insurance. That's not ideal. Okay. I'm telling a bit of my business here. That's not ideal, but you've been doing that successfully and you don't have any major medical conditions or health concerns. So God is making it so that your little baby insurance that you're paying out of pocket is enough for you. So what do you mean? Why do you need more? Why do you need more? And when I started thinking through each and every one of those things, each and every reason that I felt was legitimate for wanting something different, I looked at it through a different lens. Instead of looking at it through scarcity, I looked at it through abundance and provision. And I was able to see God showing up in each of those ways. Every single reason that I had for wanting something different, I was able to see the way that God was already showing up in that space and how he was already providing for me in that space. It blew my mind. Truly it did. Immediate repentance. I said, God, I'm so sorry. Wait a minute. How did we get here? But once I realized that I was placing the importance on my external circumstances and relying on myself and my own knowledge or resources instead of relying on God, I knew I wasn't content. And I knew that I needed to shift my mindset completely. Because I think in a way that was kind of implying that like God is not showing up for me or that God is not providing. And that is so far from the truth. Even saying those words now, it feels funny saying because that couldn't be any further from the truth. So ever since I had that revelation, right, about my discontent, and it's crazy how quickly God allowed me to walk in contentment. It was like later that same day. He was like, showing me some things and giving me confirmation that like, no, this is where you are on purpose. This is the best place for you to be. Whether it's just right now or whether it's permanently, this is a great place to be. And so ever since I had that revelation, I keep asking myself this one question, and this is how I make sure that I am walking in contentment, or this is how I find contentment. And the question is this: if God never did another thing for me, if God never changed any of my circumstances, would he still be good? And if the answer is yes, and for me the answer is a resounding yes, then why am I putting so much pressure and so much weight on changing my circumstances? If God is already good, if God is already providing for all of my needs, if God is already providing beyond my needs, if he's already given me all of the things I need and most of the things that I want, why do I need to change anything? Why? Because in that case, then now we're getting towards the spirit of gluttony, just wanting more and more and more and more and more just because. And there's no contentment in that. None at all. And so as I continued to reflect, I thought back to that feeling that I had, that statement of one day I'll be able to just rest. And once I started finding contentment in where I am now, I said, oh, wow, I can rest now. That's a choice. That is a choice to make. I can rest now. And that was just such a blessing to me. I don't have to wait until I have a new house or until I have a husband or until I make this much money. I can rest now because God is providing for me now and God is still moving and working in me now. And so it's not to say that we can never work towards any other goals. But if we are relying on our goals to bring us that internal peace, then we are not content. And the Bible tells us to be content, that we ought to be content. And so focusing on what we don't have can put a real barrier in our relationship with God. And for me, it definitely did at some points because I'm frustrated about things not happening for me and questioning God and like trying really hard not to be mad at God, but like kind of being mad or frustrated at him. And so now I'm bringing this tension into my walk and into my faith and into my relationship with him. And he's gracious enough to show it to me and to release me from that. But that is what I'm now bringing to my relationship with God, and it's presenting as a barrier, and it's making it so that maybe I don't want to spend as much time with him, or that all of my time with him is spent complaining or wondering why he's not doing the things that I want him to do. And that's a contentious relationship with God, and that's not what he wants, and that's not what it ought to be. So that discontentment is it can potentially be a negative thing in your relationship with God, and it can be bad for your mental health as well, because when we're constantly seeking external validation or external satisfaction or joy or peace or any of that, it's because we still have that internal void that we talked about earlier. And when we're always wanting bigger and better and more and more and more, then we will also always find reasons to blame ourselves for not being there as of yet. And we create these expectations of ourselves that are ridiculously high. We don't allow ourselves to ever rest. And so we continue to live in that fear and anxiety, just in different ways. So another similarity, right? Complacency and discontentment. There's a lot of fear at the root of both of those two. But living in that continues to invite more shame and self-doubt. You shame yourself by not having what the other person has, right? There's so much comparison when we're not content. And so we shame ourselves for not being where so and so is. And then we doubt our abilities to get there at all. And it creates this spiral, truly. And there is no peace in that either. God wants us to have peace, and there is peace in him, and he has promised peace and satisfaction in him. Yet and still, we continue to rely on our external circumstances to give us what he has promised exists in him and really only exists in him. It's kind of wild. It's really kind of crazy. But that doesn't mean that we stop working towards our goals. It just means that we don't allow our goals to dictate our peace, our joy, or our faith. We already have someone for that. So that's going to bring us into our scriptures for the day. There's actually two. I couldn't really decide, and I think they're both really good, and they're talking about contentment. So the first, and they're both passages that are a couple of verses long. So bear with me here. The first one is 1 Timothy 6:6-9. It says, "But godliness actually is a means of great gain when accompanied by contentment. For we have brought nothing into this world, so we cannot take anything out of it either. If we have food and covering, or food and clothing, with these we shall be content. But those who want to get rich fall into temptation and a snare and many foolish and harmful desires, which plunge men into ruin and destruction." So what this is saying is, listen, if your needs are being met, then we ought to be able to find contentment. We have to make a distinction between a want and a need. We can want things for ourselves, sure, but when it becomes a need, that's when we have that internal conflict, and that's when we start to rely on ourselves rather than relying on God. In psychology, there's this concept called Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It's an image of a pyramid, and there are different levels of needs, right? And the concept says that unless our foundational needs are being met, then we're not going to be able to meet any of the other needs, like social needs or entertainment or whatever it might be, right? So think about like the essential things that you need for life and for survival, right? Those are needs. Everything else is a want. So the verse here says that those who want to get rich fall into temptation and a snare and many foolish and harmful desires. I think that's what happens when we put so much emphasis on our wants instead of on our needs. There's a lot of temptation there because most of the time, those wants are not rooted in the Spirit or in the fruits of the Spirit. Most of the time, those wants are rooted in our own like human desires. And we're going to have those because we're human, right? But when those become the priority over the things of the Spirit, then that's when we are misaligned. And so if you do that reflection, I have a feeling that your essential needs are being met. And so the Bible says that if those essential needs are being met, then we ought to be able to find contentment. And if you cannot find contentment, then there's a problem. And you got to go to God about that because he's the one who can give you that contentment. The other verse is Philippians 4:11-13. Paul says, "Not that I speak from want, for I have learned to be content in whatever circumstances I am. I know how to get along with humble means, and I also know how to live in prosperity. In any and every circumstance, I have learned the secret of being filled and going hungry, both of having abundance and suffering need. I can do all things through him who strengthens me." He says, listen, I've been up, I've been down. Okay, I've been high, I've been low. And having been in those highs and lows is what helps you to see the power of being content and to see that it is possible to be content regardless of your circumstance. Your contentment has nothing to do with your external circumstance. That is the biggest lie of the enemy. Well, no, not the biggest. Listen, he is a liar, okay? That's one of the lies of the enemy. In the context of this conversation, that's a lie of the enemy. That your external circumstances dictate whether or not you can find contentment. That's simply not true. Who is our faith in? Who are we trusting for that contentment and for that inner peace? So let's do a little bit of a self-assessment and think about your needs versus your wants. Think about whether or not you really have felt that true contentment, or if you're still putting so much emphasis on your circumstances and wanting God to change them or wanting God to bring something new into your life. And is that stopping you from finding contentment and peace in him? Whew, all right. That was good. That was a lot. I wasn't sure if I was going to have much to say or how long this episode was going to be, but now I'm feeling like it's getting a little bit long. Okay, let's hurry up. So we're getting to our question and answer portion. Again, this is a really important part of the show because I want to be able to have a dialogue that is speaking directly to what you all are going through. So if you have a question that you want to submit to the show, please send me an email. The email address is therapyandprayer@gmail.com. Okay. All right. Our question today says, I'm working on getting closer to God, but it's been hard to find balance with regular life. I feel like when I focus on my relationship with God, I can't focus on all other areas of my life. Okay, so it's less of a question, more of a statement, but I think that the implied question here is, how can I do both? How can I get closer to God while balancing everything else that's going on in my life? And that's a really real thing. I think a lot of the times we think about our relationship with God in some very specific ways. We have this idea that we can either focus on God or we can focus on everything else in our life, and that they are separate and that they exist separately, right? A lot of us, especially if we grew up in church, we had like our church life and then our out of church life and like our worldly life, right? And so we grew up with this like dissonance between the two, and I think sometimes we carry that into adulthood. And when we become adults and we get to cultivate and develop our own personal relationship with God, we bring some of that into it as well. And so then that develops into what is called all or nothing thinking, which is another, well, it's not a defense mechanism, but it's a thought distortion in CBT, all or nothing thinking. And it's like, it can either be this or that. So I can either focus on my relationship with God, or I can have balance in my life, but I can't have both. And that is a myth. And so what really helps in getting closer with God is intertwining God with the rest of your life, with every other part of your life. So we don't only have to spend time with him in worship on Sundays or in a formal Bible study, right? Whether that's going to Bible study, like having your own personal Bible study where you're sitting down with the word and going through it. Like, those are not the only ways that we can spend time with God. But if that is your perception or your idea about how to spend time with God and get closer to him, then that's very limiting. And we tend to have a pretty limiting view on God, and we put him in a box sometimes, and that makes it difficult for us to get closer to him and to have that intimacy with him. So I think my response to that would be to integrate God into every part of your life, whether that's thinking about the media that you consume, like the music that you listen to or the podcast that you listen to. I've been doing a secular media fast, and it has been so wonderful for me because instead of thinking about like going to spend time with God, I'm just always spending time with God. and I'm spending time with God while I'm washing the dishes. Either I'm like talking to him, or I'm listening to a sermon, or I'm listening to some spiritual music, or I'm thinking about him, or like my conversations with other people, he's in them more. Like he's just in my life more. And that has made me feel so much closer to him. I heard something, I can't remember where I heard it, but it said it was saying that, a lot of times we say God first and then everything else. But a better way to think about it is having God in the center of everything else, rather than, okay, spend time with God first. All right, cool. That's out the way. Check off the list. Now go and live your life. But can you center God in your life? Can you let everything else in your life orbit around God being in the center of it? Now, I think that's going to look different for every person, but think about your life, and find space for God in spaces where you maybe typically would not involve him or include him. Find space for God in the casual things, in your free time. Like, find casual ways to spend time with God. In addition to worship on Sundays and formal Bible study. So this is not to replace that, but that is to say that that's not the only way that you can build and grow a relationship with God. So that would be my encouragement. Find ways to intertwine God into every other part of your life so that you don't feel like it's separate and like it's another responsibility that you have to put onto your plate, because life is already hard. There are plenty of things to juggle. We all have so many responsibilities already. But God is already there. He's already in every part of your life. We just don't acknowledge that, or we don't interact with him in those spaces. So find different ways to interact with God in ways that already kind of seamlessly fit into your life, that you already have going on. And I think that you'll see a lot of growth in your intimacy and relationship with God. All right. I hope this was encouraging for you all. I hope that it has given you some things to think about. And I pray that you can all find a sense of contentment and really see God moving in your life. Thank y'all so much for listening. Take care. I'll talk to you soon. Thanks for listening to this episode of Therapy and Prayer. Make sure you're subscribed and following wherever you listen to podcasts. And if the Spirit moves you, go ahead and leave us a review. If you want to submit a question to be answered on this show, send us an email at therapyandprayer@gmail.com. And make sure you're following us on TikTok at Therapy and Prayer. Thanks again for listening. I'll talk to you soon.